Did you know Napoleon wasn't actually short, yet a whole empire of stories says he was? Or that medieval doctors once handed out real corpse powder as medicine, and people took it? History isn't just full of myths, it runs on them. The stories we call too crazy to be true often hide in the archives, not as jokes, but as policies, disasters, miracles, sometimes all at once. Buckle up. We're diving into 30 historical myths that actually happened. 1. The animal trials. When pigs had lawyers. Between the 13th and 18th centuries, Europe did something we'd now call bizarre. Put animals on trial. Pigs, cows, even insects were accused of crimes, murder, theft, and property damage. They had legal representation, judges, witnesses, and formal trials. One pig that killed a child could be hanged in public after a proper court case. Rats accused of eating grain were summoned to appear in court. The reasoning: if animals were part of God's creation, they could be held morally responsible. It sounds absurd, but records show it happened. Lawyers earned fees, courts issued rulings, and communities watched animals face punishment as if they were people. It wasn't a joke. It was a serious attempt to uphold divine justice through law. Somewhere, a pig probably walked to the gallows while people argued over its guilt. History is stranger than fiction. And while pigs were getting legal defense, Victorians were unwrapping the dead for entertainment. 2. The Victorian mummy craze. The mummy unwrapping parties. In 19th century Europe, the fascination with ancient Egypt went beyond museums. People wanted to experience history. Literally, rich Victorians hosted parties where mummies were unwrapped before a live audience. Guests watched as centuries-old corpses were peeled open, sometimes accompanied by wine and conversation. Doctors got involved too, grinding mummy dust into powders called mumia and selling it as medicine. People ate it, drank it, even sniffed it, believing it could cure anything from headaches to the plague. When the supply of ancient mummies ran low, sellers didn't stop. They wrapped up fresh corpses to meet demand. It wasn't curiosity, it was cannibalism with better packaging. A grim testament to the extremes of fashion, obsession, and profit. 3. The thing you can't see from space. For decades, teachers swore the Great Wall of China was the only man-made structure visible from space. It sounded majestic, patriotic, like the ultimate symbol of human endurance. Except it's completely false. Astronauts have confirmed for years that you can't see it without any aid. The wall is long, sure, over 13,000 miles, but it's thin, blending perfectly with the Earth and mountains around it. From orbit, it vanishes into the dust. So why did everyone believe it? Because the story was too flattering to check. It made humanity sound powerful. It made China sound mythical. A perfect example of a fact that's beautiful enough to ignore the truth. Ironically, the myth spread faster than any empire, appearing in textbooks, travel guides, and even NASA trivia for decades before being debunked. It wasn't visibility, it was vanity. Proof that sometimes the lies we love most are the ones that make us feel small in the best way. And while China's myth soared sky high, Strasbourg was dancing itself into history. 4. The Dancing Plague. 1518. Strasbourg. A woman steps into the street and then starts dancing. No music, no crowd, just motion. Within days, dozens joined her. Within a week, hundreds. People danced until their feet bled, until they collapsed, until some quite literally died of exhaustion. Priests called it divine punishment. Doctors said it was hot blood. The government's fix: hire musicians. They thought organized dancing would somehow calm it down. Spoiler, it didn't. The dancing plague lasted for weeks. No one could stop. No one could explain it. Modern experts think it was mass psychosis, triggered by stress, hunger, and maybe a hallucinogenic mold called ergot growing on bread. But back then, people didn't have explanations, just rhythm and fear. It wasn't a festival, it was a breakdown. A city losing its mind one dance step at a time. And just as Europe collapsed from rhythm, England decided the real threat was people thinking while sipping coffee. 5. The Coffee Conspiracy. London, 1600s. The city's alive with energy, not from war or money, but from coffee. Coffee houses were popping up everywhere. People met to gossip, debate, argue politics, Share pamphlets. The internet before the internet, all fueled by caffeine. Ideas spread faster than ever, and the king didn't like that. Charles II, feeling the heat of criticism, decided that thinking too much was dangerous. In 1675, he issued a royal law banning coffeehouses, claiming they were hotbeds of false news, a royal move against free speech. The public erupted. Poets mocked the ban, businessmen rebelled, citizens ignored it. Within days, the king backtracked. You can stop the talk, but not the coffee. The coffeehouses reopened louder than ever, and the more they drank, the more they thought. And while London brewed rebellion in a cup, Napoleon's height became the tallest lie in European gossip. 6. Napoleon's height lie. Everyone knows Napoleon was short, tiny man, big hat, huge temper. Except he wasn't short. In fact, Napoleon stood around 5'6", completely average for his time. The confusion came from two things: bad math and British propaganda. French inches were slightly longer than British ones, and when the measurements crossed borders, Napoleon suddenly lost a few inches on paper. Add to that the British need to humiliate their greatest rival, and voila, history's favorite insult was born. Newspapers painted him as a raging little man who tried to conquer Europe out of insecurity. The idea stuck, even though portraits show him taller than many of his generals. 200 years later, people still talk about Napoleon complex, all because one empire wanted to make another look small. A perfect reminder that sometimes the loudest rumors wear the tallest boots. And while people argued over inches, the courts decided drowning could determine guilt. 7. The witchwater test. Here's how justice worked in the 1600s. If they thought you were a witch, they tied you up and threw you into a pond. If you sank, you were innocent. If you floated, you were guilty and burned. The idea was that pure water would reject evil, but really it just rejected logic. Hundreds of innocent women drowned or burned because of a superstition wrapped in fake science. Communities panicked. Neighbors accused neighbors. Even ministers and judges joined the madness. People feared witches so badly, they created a test that guaranteed tragedy. It didn't prove anything except how far fear can go when people stop asking questions. It wasn't justice. It was a medieval coin toss with human lives, one of history's darkest reminders of what happens when ignorance becomes law. And as witches floated and sank, Americans were scared of a fruit that just wanted to be eaten. 8. The tomato panic. In the 1700s, Americans believed tomatoes were deadly. They called them poison apples because rich people kept dying after eating them. The truth? The fruit wasn't the problem. The plates were. Wealthy families used pewter dishware, which contained lead. The acid from the tomatoes pulled the lead right out of the plates, poisoning anyone who took a bite. People blamed the bright red fruit instead. For years, tomatoes were banned from dinner tables. Considered dangerous and foreign, farmers avoided growing them, and the few who did were treated like lunatics. Then came Colonel Robert Johnson. In 1820, he stood on courthouse steps in New Jersey and ate a basket of tomatoes in front of a horrified crowd. People waited for him to drop dead. He didn't. The myth died on the spot. It wasn't poison, it was cookware and a hole. Lot of bad chemistry. And while tomatoes terrified the living, Catherine the Great made snow out of sugar. Literally. 9. Russia's fake winter. In the late 1700s, Catherine the Great wanted to throw a perfect winter festival at her palace. There was just one problem: no snow. Russia's queen couldn't have a snowless celebration, so she gave an order: make it snow. Servants scrambled and spread crushed sugar across the palace grounds to create a fake winter wonderland. It looked magical. Sparkling white courtyards, shimmering under lanterns. But soon the sugar melted, turning everything sticky. Horses panicked, guests slipped, and the ants had the party of their lives. By morning, the palace was a disaster zone. Boots ruined, streets glued together, and an army of servants cleaning up a sweet melting mess. What was meant to be a show of power turned into pure chaos. It wasn't a celebration. It was a sugar-coated illusion, proof that sometimes royal pride melts faster than snow. 10. The Great Emu War. In 1932, Australia declared war, not against another nation, against emus, giant flightless birds. After World War I, farmers struggled with emus raiding their crops. The government sent soldiers with machine guns to handle the enemy. It sounded simple enough until they actually met the birds. The emus were too fast, too scattered, too smart. Bullets missed, trucks broke down, and the birds just kept coming. One officer joked that the emus won every round. After weeks of failure, thousands of rounds fired, and 0 victories, the government gave up. The birds actually outsmarted the army. Newspapers mocked the whole affair. Farmers were furious. Politicians were embarrassed. The emus, victorious. It wasn't a war, it was a comedy with feathers, and the birds got the last laugh. And while emus outsmarted men, doctors bled patients dry in the name of medicine. 11. The bloodletting craze. For centuries, doctors thought illness came from having too much blood. The cure, drain it. Headache, bleed him. Fever, bleed her. Even George Washington fell victim. His doctors drained so much blood, some historians believe it may have contributed to his death. Bloodletting wasn't just a minor procedure, it was a full-scale ritual. Cups, leeches, and knives became everyday tools of medicine. Patients left hospitals weaker, paler, and sometimes closer to the grave than when they arrived. Doctors defended the practice fiercely, citing ancient texts and the balance of the humors. Families trusted them, even as the evidence stacked up. Hundreds, maybe thousands of lives lost to the same misguided logic. It wasn't healing, just organized bleeding in disguise, and yet it persisted for centuries. A grim reminder that even the smartest people can be convinced by tradition over truth. And as blood flowed, the British Navy decided volunteering wasn't optional. 12. The press gang rule, when volunteering was mandatory. In 18th century Britain, the Navy desperately needed sailors. Trouble was, no one wanted to join. Enter the press gangs, groups of men who roamed the streets, dragging drunks and wanderers onto ships. You woke up with a hangover and a new career at sea. Refuse, be ready to be beaten. Resist. They had ways. Families lived in fear of those nights when the gangs came knocking. The Navy called it service. Historians call it kidnapping. Men had no training, no choice, and little hope of escape. Yet somehow, this became a socially accepted practice. It wasn't patriotism. It was law in uniform. A reminder that sometimes the rules serve the powerful, not the people. And while sailors got kidnapped, a con artist sold the Eiffel Tower. Twice. 13. The man who sold the Eiffel Tower. In the 1920s, a clever con artist named Victor Lustig read a newspaper article. The Eiffel Tower needed repairs. He saw an opportunity. Pretending to be a government official, he offered to sell the tower for scrap metal. And someone bought it literally. The buyer paid millions in exchange. When the buyer realized he had been tricked, he didn't go to the police. Too embarrassed to tell anyone, Lustig saw his chance and sold it again. Same city, same scheme, new victim. It wasn't just a fraud, it was pure confidence and timing. Lustig's charm made the impossible believable. It's one of history's most daring scams, proving that sometimes people fall for what they want to believe, even when reality is staring them in the face. 14. The Pope's astronomer. The Church that studied the stars. For centuries, the Church punished scientists for saying the Earth moved around the sun. Galileo famously spent years under house arrest for daring to question the heavens. But eventually, the Vatican built its own observatory. Priests became astronomers. They studied the same skies they once told others were blasphemous. Today, the Vatican still operates telescopes and funds research. It's a fascinating twist. The same institution that silenced discovery eventually became a hub for it. It wasn't hypocrisy, it was divine rebranding. The Church realized that understanding the universe could coexist with faith, even if it meant hiring the very scientists it once condemned. It's a story about adaptability, irony, and the surprising ways power can shift its stance over time. 15. Japan's no rescue rule. In Japan's Edo period, honor ruled everything, and that included when not to help. If a samurai saw someone drowning and dove in to save them, he wasn't seen as heroic, he was seen as disruptive. Because back then, saving a life meant interfering with fate. Destiny was sacred. If someone was meant to die, stepping in could be considered arrogance, even a violation of the natural order. So yes, saving a stranger could destroy your career, your reputation, even your family's honor. Records from the time show punishments for this improper interference. Helping others wasn't just discouraged, it was literally against the code. People were taught that kindness without permission was chaos. As Japan modernized, this logic faded away. But for centuries it shaped how people viewed heroism. It wasn't about cruelty, it was about ritual, a world where doing the right thing could be the wrong move. 16. The electric resurrection. When scientists shocked the dead. In the early 1800s, electricity was new, exciting, and terrifying. Scientists wondered, could it bring the dead back to life? They started experimenting on corpses. In 1803, a doctor in London zapped the body of a freshly executed criminal. The result? The body twitched, its eyes opened, and its jaw moved like it wanted to speak. The crowd screamed. For a moment, it seemed like death itself could be reversed. Spectators were both horrified and amazed, watching science mimic the miracles of fiction. Of course, it wasn't resurrection. The electricity simply fired the nerves, making muscles spasm. But for those who witnessed it, it was enough to believe the impossible was happening. It wasn't science. It was horror in a lab coat, a shocking reminder of human curiosity and the thin line between genius and madness. And while experiments shocked the dead, Peter the Great shocked the living, one beard at a time. 17. The beard tax. When Russia charged you for your face. In the late 1600s, Tsar Peter the Great wanted Russia to modernize. He admired Europe's ships, science, and clean-shaven faces. So he did something radical. He banned beards, unless men paid a tax. Guards carried razors in the streets. If you had a beard and no receipt, they shaved it off on the spot. It was an odd way to modernize, but it worked. Men lined up to pay the tax or comply, and Peter's vision of a sleek European-style Russia began to take shape. Imagine paying money just to keep your chin. It seems absurd, but for Peter the beard was more than hair. It was a symbol of old traditions he wanted to replace. It wasn't reform. It was facial extortion, a quirky, unforgettable chapter in the story of modernization. And as faces went bare, artists fooled armies without firing a single shot. 18. The Ghost Army. When artists fooled the Nazis, World War II didn't just need soldiers, it needed deception. Enter the Ghost Army, a secret U.S. unit made of artists, designers, and sound engineers. Their mission? Convince the enemy an army was somewhere it wasn't. They built rubber tanks, painted giant shadows, and played recordings of marching troops through massive speakers. From the air, it looked like a real battlefield. German scouts fell for it. They moved troops to the wrong locations, wasting resources and time. Thousands of lives were saved because of a lie. It wasn't combat, it was art with a purpose. Strategy powered by imagination, paint, and sound. The Ghost Army proved that sometimes the pen, or the brush, is mightier than the sword. And while ghosts were being photographed, the living were learning that belief could be bought. 19. The Ghost Photos. When people paid to see the dead. After the Civil War, America was full of grief. Families wanted proof their loved ones hadn't truly left. Photographers offered a solution. They claimed to capture spirits on film. A living person would be photographed, and then a faint ghostly figure was added in the background. People believed it. They cherished it. They paid. Even famous figures like Mary Todd Lincoln posed with the spirit of Abraham Lincoln. It wasn't comfort. It was business. Grief turned into a service with cameras as the medium. Families held on to the hope of seeing the dead again, and photographers capitalized on that longing. It was proof of humanity's desire to believe, even when reality was far less kind. And as spirits floated on film, Parisian women glowed green, sometimes fatally. 20. The green face powder. In 18th century France, pale skin was everything. To achieve it, women used a new face powder, bright, smooth, and radiant. The secret ingredient? Arsenic, poison. It gave a perfect glow, but it slowly burned through the skin and bloodstream. Still, fashion didn't care. Women kept using it, even as doctors warned of sickness and death. Some drank it, some sniffed it, some even rubbed it into their scalps. Beauty was worth the risk. It was vanity in its most literal, deadly form. It wasn't survival, it was sacrifice. Proof that sometimes looking alive was literally worth dying for. And while makeup killed, A piper in Germany proved that music could steal far more than hearts. 21. The Pied Piper of Hamelin. The children who vanished for real. You've heard the story. A man in bright clothes walks into town, plays his flute, and leads away all the rats. Then, when the townspeople refuse to pay him, he returns and takes the children. It sounds like a dark fairy tale, but in 1284, the town of Hamelin in Germany recorded something strange. 130 children left Hamelin, led away by a piper, and were never seen again. No rats, no magic, just real children disappearing under mysterious circumstances. Historians still debate what happened. Some say they were kidnapped by a traveling group or moved to work in distant towns. Others suggest disease or natural disaster. The story became legend, twisted over centuries into a cautionary tale. But the truth is sobering. A town lost its children, and no one really knows why. It wasn't fiction. It was history disguised as a story, a reminder that some fairy tales are darker than we imagine. 22. The Trojan Horse. It sounds like pure legend. Greeks hiding inside a giant wooden horse to invade Troy. Ridiculous, right? Like something out of an ancient prank show with higher stakes. Except, archaeologists actually found evidence near the ancient city's gates. Burnt ruins, charred wood fragments, and strange structures that didn't match temples or homes. Something happened there. Something that involved fire, trickery, and maybe a giant wooden frame. Some historians now think the horse wasn't literal. It could have been a battle machine, a wooden tower, or even a heavy wooden ram nicknamed the Horse because of its shape. The myth just added drama later, polishing the story for poets and playwrights. But the truth remains, Troy didn't fall to brute force. It fell to clever marketing. Someone opened the gates for what looked impressive, and inside was the end of a civilization. The Trojan Horse wasn't fantasy, it was ancient clickbait with better storytelling. 23. The London Necropolis Railway. The train to the afterlife. In the 1800s, London had a serious problem. Too many dead people. Cemeteries were full, the air smelled terrible, and health officials worried about disease. The solution? Build a railway just for funerals. It was called the London Necropolis Railway. Coffins and mourners traveled from London to a massive new cemetery in the countryside, far from the city's chaos. Tickets were divided by class. First class for the wealthy, third class for the poor. Even in death, society kept its order. The train ran daily, quietly moving thousands of bodies for decades. It wasn't myth, it was Victorian practicality. A transport system designed to respect life, death, and social hierarchy all at once. The idea seems creepy today, but at the time, it solved a real problem with efficiency and a very British sense of organization. 24. The flood that inspired Noah. For centuries, the story of Noah's Ark was treated as pure legend, a moral fable about obedience and rain. But deep under the Black Sea, scientists found evidence of a massive flood around 7,500 years ago, so sudden it drowned entire coastlines. Villages vanished overnight. Survivors fled inland with one unforgettable story. The world had drowned, and they had lived. Over time, that memory evolved, from oral tale to scripture to global myth. It wasn't just a story about faith, it was prehistory remembering trauma. Turns out the flood was real, the animals 2 by 2, maybe not, but the water, that definitely came. 25. The Kraken. It was just science for centuries. Sailors told tales of a giant sea monster dragging ships into the depths. They called it the Kraken. People dismissed it as legend, until scientists discovered the giant squid. Some of these creatures grow over 40 feet long, with eyes the size of dinner plates and powerful tentacles. They can crush prey, shoot ink, and vanish into the black water. It's easy to see why sailors were terrified. What looks like a monster from the deck could easily be a real creature hiding in the deep. The myth wasn't false. Humans simply hadn't met the animal yet. Sailors' stories mixed imagination with reality, creating a legend grounded in truth. It wasn't magic. It was biology. Terrifying, mysterious, and perfectly capable of inspiring nightmares on the open sea. And as the ocean turned dangerous, the sky decided to put on its own terrifying show. 26. The Blood Rain. When the Sky Got Weird. Imagine stepping outside and seeing red rain fall from the sky. Not pink, not rusty, blood red. In the Middle Ages, people freaked out. They thought it was a sign of war, curses, or that God was angry. Entire towns panicked at the sight. But modern science has a less dramatic explanation. The red color came from dust and algae carried by strong winds, mixing with rain clouds. Nature was messy, theatrical, and terrifying. But it wasn't supernatural. Still, for centuries, the phenomenon inspired fear and wonder. Records describe villagers screaming, priests praying, and scholars scratching their heads. It wasn't an apocalypse. It was just weather with flair. Proof that even the sky likes to make history a little dramatic. And while blood rained from above, Vikings quietly beat Columbus to America. 27, when the Vikings accidentally found America. Long before Columbus, Vikings sailed west from Europe. People called it legend until scientists discovered a Viking village in Newfoundland, Canada. Iron nails, wooden buildings, and tools all dated back to around 1000 AD, 500 years before Columbus set sail. The Vikings had built a small camp, explored the area, and then left. Why didn't anyone know about it? Maybe the winters were brutal. Maybe the locals didn't want visitors. Either way, the Vikings didn't stick around, and the story faded into myth. So yes, the myth was real. The Vikings discovered America first. They just didn't feel the need to report it to the world. It wasn't legend. It was history hiding in plain sight. And as longships returned home, sailors swore the ocean was full of serpents, and they weren't entirely wrong. 28. The sea serpent. For centuries, sailors swore they saw monsters in the ocean. Long necks, scaly bodies, tentacles, teeth sharp enough to eat a man. Some thought they were dragons. Others thought the end of the world had arrived. The truth? Most of these sightings were a type of fish called the oarfish. It's a ribbon-like creature that can reach 36 feet, with a long head that looks almost cartoonishly evil. It floats slowly in deep waters, rarely seen, and often mistaken for something supernatural. It wasn't magic. It was biology with flair. A creature so strange, it inspired centuries of oceanic myths. People panicked for generations over a fish that just wanted to swim quietly, proving that sometimes nature itself writes the best horror stories. And while the seas hid their secrets, the Shang dynasty whispered through bones once called dragon relics. 29. The Oracle Bones. How dragon bones proved a dynasty. For a long time, China's Shang dynasty was considered legend. Like King Arthur in Britain, historians had texts, but no real evidence. Then, in the late 1800s, Chinese pharmacists sold dragon bones as medicine. Scholars noticed unusual carvings on some bones. They weren't dragons. They were turtle shells and ox shoulder blades. These bones had been used by Shang kings over 3,000 years ago to predict the future. Inscriptions recorded royal lineages and events that matched historical texts perfectly. Suddenly, a dynasty long thought mythical was real, confirmed by artifacts that had been ground into powder for centuries. It wasn't legend. It was history hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone curious enough to notice the details. And while bones revealed a dynasty, the sea hid a whale worthy of legend. 30. Mocha Dick, the real whale behind Moby Dick. Long before Moby Dick hit bookshelves, sailors feared a giant white sperm whale off the coast of Chile. It survived dozens of hunts, ramming ships and smashing boats. Witnesses described scars covering its massive body. Proof it had faced countless battles and lived to tell the tale. Herman Melville read the stories and turned this real-life terror into literary legend. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't exaggeration. It was a whale so fearsome that sailors' tales blurred into myth. Reality had already written the horror story. It wasn't fiction. It was nature's own epic. 30 myths later, one thing is certain. History is stranger than anything fiction could dream up. Empires rise on lies, entire cities vanish into jungles, and sometimes the dead reveal secrets we never knew to ask. Logic? Optional. Absurdity? Guaranteed. If you loved these unbelievable truths, hit subscribe and join us next time as we dig up even more stories too wild to believe.